What is a spectacle? Super Metroid was the first Metroid game I ever played, and likewise, it was the reason I never liked the Metroid series. I've had maybe 2 or 3 encounters with Metroid 3 throughout the years, and every time I ever thought I'd give it a go, I moved to the right, went back to the left, grabbed the Morph Ball, lasted maybe another 5 or 6 minutes, and then remembered why I wasn't a fan of Metroidvanias. What can I say? If the aim isn't simply move right, then I didn't think it was worth my effort. I wanted to platform, not go through a glorified maze. Anyway, as I mentioned in the previous videos, in 2019 I decided to give the series a fair shot and fell in love with it. I played Zero Mission, Samus Returns on 3DS, Super Metroid, and then Fusion. Out of the 4 of those, I'd say I loved 2, liked one of them a little less, but still enjoyed it, and one of them was a clear 4th place, that I didn't enjoy nearly as much, but it was okay. I imagine hearing that most people would assume I loved Zero Mission and Super, and the 3rd or 4th games would be Samus Returns or Fusion in either order. And well, what if I told you this is how I ranked it? I know, blasphemy. But if I might make a defense for my pre-YouTubing self, Zero Mission and Samus Returns are fairly modern games, and they're designed as handheld games. Despite the fact that they're still Metroidvanias, they're a lot more simplified when it comes to the guidance because they were released after the turn of millennia, when certain quality of life improvements became standard in video games. Primarily aspects related to standardized and tighter controls, less moments of despair from being completely lost with excessive moments of backtracking, and significantly less farming. I always thought it was bizarre when I would hear people say that Super Metroid is perfect and is the best Metroid title. As per usual, I always tend to simply blame things on nostalgia, but I was noticing it from people who were new to the series as well, and I just didn't understand it. Like, I guess I could accept someone saying they enjoyed it more than Samus Returns because no matter which version of Metroid 2 you play, it's its own unique experience and not really repeated in the other games in the series. Well, I guess Dread comes close to it, but you get what I mean. So if someone told me Super was better than Metroid 2, I could understand it. But I couldn't fathom anyone would enjoy Super more than Zero Mission. In any case, I think it's time to come clean. When I replayed the series back in 2019, I thought Super Metroid felt so archaic that I didn't even finish it. I gave it an honest effort. I saw a lot of the map, and I'm pretty sure I faced off against 2 if not 3 of the main enemies. I relied a lot on guides. Everything just felt outdated though. And of course it did. It came out 10 and 23 years prior to the games that I had just finished playing. Anyway, after a few hours and probably 60%ish of the game done, I gave up and read a plot summary and just moved on to Fusion. That was good enough for pre-YouTube me. This time, however, I'm Nintendine. And if I'm going to live up to that name, I have to persevere. I got into Super Metroid with the idea that I was going to tolerate all the jank and get through it. And I hope you'll be happy to hear that not only did I tolerate the jank, I enjoyed the game, and I understood why it was iconic. And outside of maybe 2 or 3 things that got on my nerves, I thought the jank wasn't nearly as bad as I remembered. And I think it would be ingenuine if I didn't acknowledge the reality that this is basically the newest game I've played in the past few months. All of the Mega Man games I went through before doing the Metroid games came out in '94 or earlier. And where last time I played Zero Mission and Samus Returns prior to this game, this time I played Metroid NES and Samus Returns. So obviously I didn't notice any jank. I was conditioned. This is quite literally the first next-gen original title that I've played since Sonic Adventure, which feels like a lifetime ago. I don't think that should take anything away from Super, but I feel like I should acknowledge it because if you're someone that still hasn't done the Metroid games and you decide to jump into Super, I want you to understand my perspective so you're not as confused as I was when I heard other people's perspectives of this game after my late 2010s experience. Now look, I still don't think this game is a masterpiece, but I think the stuff that bothers me is so fixable that it could easily become a masterpiece. As a matter of fact, I think on a 2nd and 3rd playthrough, you won't even need to fix anything. The main issue primarily lies in that first playthrough. And I'll just be straight up. This game took me like 9 hours to beat, and I think there was about 3 hours worth of mindlessly running around the entire map to figure out where I had to go next. And it wasn't all from a single moment, it was from like 2 or 3 major moments in the second half of the game. So everything before that was a good level of straightforward. And the game does a pretty good job of locking you from advancing in typical Metroid style, requiring you to backtrack and look around an area to find the next power-up or hidden passage or whatever. And I'm not counting these moments as part of the 3 hours. Like, the game still took me 6 hours even without those extra 3 hours that I'm talking about. So obviously I spent a ton of time looking around for most part. Those parts during the 6 hours when I was doing my searching felt like they were well done. But for whatever reason, there were 2 or 3 moments that just kinda locked me out from figuring out where I needed to go, and I had to go on a major hunt to figure it out. And I think the game could have done a better job guiding me through those moments. Now granted, the benefit of this lack of guidance is the number of missiles and E-tanks I found. So I was much stronger than I expected I'd be, and in my final 2 boss fights, I needed every bit of health and every last power-up. So I'm thankful of that, and to some extent, I consider it good game design. But the way Super did it versus, say, Zero Mission, Samus Returns, and Dread, meant that I had to go on a hunt through the entire map about 3 times because I was lost. Whereas in those games, you might only do a full map sweep once, and that's closer to the end when you have every power-up. Because in each of my 3 major hunts I did during Super, only in one of them was I powered up enough to get literally everything I wanted in the map. Like literally all I needed was 2 or 3 moments in the game where a door is blocked off or a corridor is better highlighted that could have saved me roughly 1/3 of my playtime. And I get that some people enjoy that and view it as part of the experience, but regardless of how you personally feel about it, it is very much outdated when compared to the more modern Metroid titles. And it's not like I'm without precedence. Obviously there are sequence breaks, but there was a ton of moments throughout this game where it discreetly guides you to the next area or blocks you off from returning or progressing to a different section. Whether that's with a power-up requirement or a straight-up locked door. So it's not like the moments I got stuck in couldn't have been better implemented. And like I said, that's my only true gripe. I think it's a fair complaint, and it's a complaint that I completely understand what other people make. Because I can't say for certain, but I'm fairly confident that when I played this game back then, I probably got stuck in the same exact segments. And I gotta imagine that's why I gave up back then. Obviously, I could have used a guide, but have you ever tried jumping into a guide in a Metroid game when you haven't been using it from the start? It's like being given ingredients for a cake that someone else already started to make and you have to find your own recipe to finish baking it. You might as well start over from scratch at that point. So yeah, I'm not really experienced enough in the series to know exactly when people get lost, but it always seems to be in the second half of the game, usually after you've beaten the first 2 bosses. So I think adding slightly better guidance at that point would be my one potential fix for a somewhat major critique. Aside from that, I have some issues with the controls. I didn't really like the run button being a thing. It meant I always had to keep pressing it, which isn't fun for a generally slow-paced game like this. I had to remap my controls to find something usable. Most notably, I used R to shoot, and I cycled through my weapons with A instead, with L being set to aim up. I actually had to sacrifice aim down, which led to 2 or 3 frustrating moments during my playthrough, but overall, I found the controls were more manageable this way. It just all felt very outdated, but I won't fault the game too much for it given its release date. Also, the wall jump really sucks. You gotta press the D-pad off the wall slightly before jumping. It didn't take a whole ton of time to get used to, but I definitely didn't master it. Likewise with the infinite jumping. Like, I can't explain it, but the timing just felt a bit off. These things weren't really that janky, but I could say they're janky adjacent, if that makes sense. There's just all these things about the way that Samus feels that I 100% understand as a product of the time, but it's the reason why so many people will often have an overarching blanket statement and say that Samus feels tighter to control in the GBA games than she did in the Super Nintendo before. The issue is that with Metroid 1 and 2, the way Samus felt was in line with the visuals. They were 8-bit games, so it felt 8-bit. Super Metroid, on the other hand, is absolutely gorgeous. Like, the visuals here could almost match up with Fusion and Zero visuals. Obviously, since the GBA was basically a portable SNES, but I think Super Metroid did a really good job keeping the darker undertone than the GBA games did. But that's besides the point. It more or less looks like them, but doesn't quite control like them, and I think that messes with people's brains. Or at least, it did mine. Anyway, beyond that, Super Metroid can easily be considered the first complete experience in the series. In the same manner that Link to the Past took the NES Zelda game and made it actually playable without a million outside sources, Super Metroid could almost be considered a reimagining of Metroid 1 because it's a game you could actually get through without any guidance. And if you recall in my last video, I mentioned that the only thing Metroid 2 was actually lacking was a minimalistic map and it would be so much better. Well, Super Metroid literally gives you a minimalistic map. And as a result, it's so much better. It does just enough to guide you without holding your hand, which outside of the major talking points I discussed previously, was implemented perfectly. I was able to collect so many E-tanks and missiles, and even power bombs, and power-ups without thinking too much about it. Just based on the simple fact that when I entered a new area, it would change the color on the map. So I could comfortably explore with my heart's extent with not worry about veering off the main path that would get me lost. Without the map, getting to a junction would have caused me so much stress. But in this case, I knew that if I went right and cleared an area or hit a dead end, I'd be able to eventually come back and go left without too much thought for the most part. The map isn't fully uncovered, by the way. It's more like a privilege, not a right. In the map grid, whenever you get to a new section, you'll uncover a square unit of the map, and as you maneuver, more units will get uncovered. And if you're good about your exploration, and in most cases the game will edge you towards them so you don't even have to be that good, you'll get to a map room which will uncover a vast majority of the map. But the map will still not have every location uncovered. You'll still have to find your own secret paths and hidden areas. And it's kinda neat because sometimes you're required to use those hidden paths to get by. So even though you have the map, you still have to figure out how to get to those sections of the map, which, as I mentioned in the previous video, I think is an excellent system for this type of game. When I said the map was minimalistic, I meant it. They'll be kind enough to throw a dot in a map unit to indicate there's a collectible in the area, but you're required to figure out how to collect it. They're pretty generous in including save locations too, which I think was a critical design choice back then. And in addition to the map and save rooms, you'll have weapon and ammo recharge stations spread out throughout the map. They're still pretty rare to come by, so you won't be completely cut out of the mindlessly farming, but there's much less mindless farming than the NES game. Also, farming doesn't take nearly as long, nor is it as finicky, and the locations are just much better placed on your paths now too. Like, the game designers seem to have explicitly placed these recharge stations or farming locations in areas almost as a warning flag that it's about to get crazy beyond this location. Either some crazy puzzle solving with tons of enemies or straight up boss fights. I never felt like my life was at risk because I didn't have enough health or missiles in this game. Honestly, that was a surprise for me. And I assume it was the case because I was very explorative and diligent in my advancement throughout the game. In Metroid 2, the skill required to defeat the Metroids was preparation, and I think that applies here as well. If you want to go through the game, it's not about figuring out attack patterns and mastering the timing in the boss fights. It's about making sure you're thoroughly prepared when you get to them. I found this game very easy, but it was easy because I put in the time to make it easy. So when I took hundreds of units of damage from them, I still had a good 10 or 20% remaining. I barely even had to dodge, but I earned that. I earned that right to coast through the massive boss fights because I searched a whole lot. Whether it was because I was lost or curious doesn't matter. The important thing is I did the time and reaped the reward, especially in the endgame. But I'm getting way ahead of myself. This game didn't start with those boss fights. It starts off with one of the most chilling introductions to any classic game I've ever played, and definitely the most chilling on this channel so far. Like, in case you forgot, you're playing a horror thriller. The way everything comes up in this scene. There are literally dead human scientists on the floor with your standard gaming press start blinking. It's actually really weird to see in a Nintendo title, especially given the specific character took part in the original Super Smash Bros. Along these guys. The tune, the way everything pans is just so eerie that I can't help but understand why all those years ago, I never got into this. I was probably scared, or at least uncomfortable by the thought of playing through it. The game starts off with Samus giving us a quick recap via text and a more modern looking cutscene of what occurred in the first two games. She's reminding us that she destroyed the Queen Metroid and the baby hatched and helped her escape from SR-388. Well, actually, she says it followed her, but that must be a pride thing because that baby Metroid definitely helped us beat Metroid 2. But she refers to it as a confused child, because in essence this Metroid developed a bond with Samus. It thinks she's her mother. By the way, the music and general sound work during this whole scene is phenomenal. This game does an excellent job mixing the music and sound with the atmosphere. It sacrifices having commanding, catchy tunes and instead focuses on immersing you in the experience. So while I didn't really love the music per se, I love the sound of this game, if that makes sense. But anyway, Samus notes that she immediately took the baby Metroid to the research station at Ceres to allow them to study its qualities. The scientists suggested the Metroid powers could be harnessed for the good of civilization. Yeah, this definitely sounds like a horror flick. As soon as Samus left Ceres, there was a distress call, so she had to return. Apparently, they were under attack. She jumps into the ship and makes her way through the dark corridors. She gets to the room that was shown in the title screen, along with the very much dead and blood-ridden scientists on the floor. On to the next room, where she found the Metroid. And from the shadow emerges none other than frickin' Ridley. Oh, I went at him quick. Let me clarify this before I continue. My memory of this game is virtually nothing. I didn't get through the whole experience when I played it 6 years ago, and I haven't watched a retrospective series on it in like 8 years. Everything was very much a newcomer experience. So when I ran into Ridley here, I actually thought I had to beat him. Fortunately for me, he flew off and Samus was sent straight to an escape sequence. The ship was going to self-destruct. This was easy enough to get through, but I loved what they did with the camera work to really highlight it. Samus quickly escapes with the research station exploding in the background, and heads straight back to where the journey all began. The Space Pirates' home base, Planet Zebes. You know how it goes. Park the ship, head indoors, but obviously not to the right. The door is to the left because the game has to teach you the convention if you've never played the first two games. That wall will be breakable later, but not yet, my friend. Not yet. Head inside, make your way down past a few tunnels that you can't go through, pass a red door so you can't open it, drop down an eerily familiar vertical shaft, enter the very same lair we defeated the Mother Brain in, and question if the space pirates are even still here. This place very much looks untouched and abandoned. Head to the door, down the elevator. Ladies and gentlemen, we're back. And the morph ball is right where we left it. But wait, what's the surveillance? Oh, I guess there's actually something going on that we don't know about. Continue on to the right, you can now use your morph ball to access a new area. This new area gives you missile tanks, which means you now break through the red doors. This area is small. For now, there isn't much left to check. But there is another surveillance camera, which means someone is definitely around here. A lot of what we've done so far taught us how to move around, but this small entry teaches us how to Metroid. To get through to E, we have to run through A, B, C, D, but the game lays it out so that you need A and C to get to B, and then B to get to D, which lets you go to E. I shouldn't have to break it down any more than that. I've already talked way too much about it in my previous 2 videos, and if you're watching this, I'm fairly confident you get the gist of what a Metroidvania is. And when you figure out there's nothing else to find, you'll naturally decide to head back towards the ship when all of a sudden, space pirates. Oh yeah, they're definitely here now. Samus set off an alarm after all, so they're here to investigate. They're fortunately not too much of a challenge, but they're here. The bigger challenge is getting used to the finicky jump controls, but I digress. This time we can go left because we have the morph ball. But no, it's blocked, so we can go right because we have the missiles. Going right gets you the first map. And you now have a name for the location you're in. It's Criteria. And as you look around, you'll save your game, and you'll be able to roll into the tunnel you skipped. And when you enter a room, you'll find the bombs. But the exit door is locked. This was some kind of booby trap. You have to kill the Jozu statue now. And it's frantic and without warning. And it's amazing to me how these moments just happen as you go through the game. You'll be calm and exploring, and then BAM! Mini boss fight. Or BAM! Horde of new type of enemy that requires precision. It's one of my favorite features of this game, and it can only succeed because the visuals and sound design allow it to succeed. But guess what? Now that you have the bomb, that wall to the right of your ship can be passed. And when you pass it, you'll see a green door you can't pass through. But you can also jump up these ledges. And it takes you nowhere because at some point you can't jump any higher. Yeah, you made it past one checkpoint, but that just made you reach more checkpoints. And with every power-up and every collectible, there's more to look for, more to return to, more to experience. You'll run into an E-tank and double your health before taking on some more space pirates. You'll break through this door on the right, but notice the map doesn't have anything behind it. It's a mysterious hallway, and this looks important, but if it was important, it would be on the map. And then when you go through the door, you find a statue. And you might not recognize the 3 monsters on the bottom, but the one on the top, you know you just faced him. This is clearly the entrance to whatever is in charge of the space pirates. This is the ultimate checkpoint, and you can only pass through it if you defeat the 4 monsters on the statue. I'm all of like 15 minutes into the game, and I've already done and learned so much. And of course I have. My map is only a fraction of the size now as it will be later, and it grows exponentially. This is video game brilliance. They basically give you a 10x10 square and ask you to Metroid. When you succeed, they now increase the sides by 2 feet and ask you to Metroid all over again, in this new square with all of the powers you've received. You'll be in the same room you were in 20 minutes ago, but with all the powers you have, it's a completely new room. So while it seems like it's only a 20% increase on your 10-foot side, in actuality, your square has now increased almost 50% as much as it was before. So if it took me 15 minutes to go through the start of the game, the next seemingly slight expansion will make me have an additional 22.5 minutes to go through. Am I making sense? Good. Now class, if you could turn your textbook to the next chapter, we'll start our trigonometry lesson. Anyway, the game continues on, and you'll run into so many different species that behave so differently, requiring different tactics or utilization of weapons. It's amazing the amount of effort they put into every unique area to keep things fresh as you advance, but familiar enough to not completely throw you off. Every now and then you'll enter a room and the door will lock behind you. This is about as handholdy as the game gets. You have to use what you've learned to find the secret. You'll notice blocks exploding rather than disappearing, and they have a symbol on them indicating that at some point you'll have that power and you can get rid of that block. Fairly early on, you'll enter this room that has these blocks that the grapple will hook onto, but you might not even think twice about it. And in 3 hours, when you're back in that room, so much more powerful and complete, you might not even remember being there earlier. You'll continue running around Brinstar enjoying one of the game's finer tunes, making it through another door that locks behind you, and as you pass through a corridor with enemies that require missiles to defeat, when all of a sudden, a boss fight. But you'll notice the door on the bottom is green. Remember that green door we saw earlier? Yeah, your reward for beating this boss is the super missiles. Your horizon expands a bit more. Time to keep Metroiding. But wait, charge beam. Honestly, this power-up is kind of useless. I think if you run out of missiles, it becomes useful if you're in a bind, but I don't even know if I used it. Mega Buster, it is not. But that being said, I think the way the power-up is hidden is intentional. You could easily pass by it 100 times as you go through the game and never figure out it's down there. I just happened to be curious, so I fell into the room that it sat in. Eventually, you'll start running into gates, and their colors will change corresponding to what kind of weapon you'll need to get through them. So effectively, they're one-way doors, meant to halt your progress or send you to an alternate route with something critical. But it also allows for a quick return to an area after you accomplish the path you're in. It's just another way the game is guiding you through your adventure without even realizing it. And oh yeah, as you get to the end of the game, you have more expertise and you'll be able to shoot through walls, which means later on in the end of the game, when you're backtracking to hunt for missiles and other power-ups, you'll be able to comfortably enter and exit areas. It's like having a key, but so much cooler. Now, keep in mind, I was pretty much running the whole time I was playing this game, almost always holding the Y button, as if I was playing Mario. But at some point, you'll get to a room that will actually require you to use the run button to advance, because the blocks will collapse if you're not fast enough. And I imagine most players that would get here and learn that fact will now never let go of the run button because it makes traversing the game that much quicker. I hope I'm not getting on your nerves because I'm once again going to praise their ability to tutorialize without putting a dang text box on the screen. Of course, that also means a modern gamer probably has to Google how to get past it, whereas back in the 90s you probably asked your friend how to get through the room and they asked their friend who had a guide and that's how you learn to advance through this section, but that's besides the point. You'll eventually notice a yellow door. That's new. You'll have to come back to that one when you get the power bomb. You'll walk into a room with shallow water and just suddenly feel like you weigh 10 times more. So you'll just want to avoid the water areas, for now. Eventually, you'll go down an elevator and into Meridia. Well, first, if you're curious, you'll find this room to the right and just have yet another mental note on a future platform you hope to be able to reach as you collect more abilities. And then you go down to Meridia. The dark and somber caves. The music is more intense here. It definitely feels like you're in deeper now. It all starts over. Save rooms, E-tanks, need to find a map, bam, high jump boots. I guess I know how I'm getting to that ledge from earlier, but before heading back, it's always worth searching for more tanks to help you get stronger. But all you'll find is dead ends, because the game wants you to leave Meridia. You're not ready for it yet. But now you know it's down there, so back to Brinstar, and up to that ledge, and we just keep hunting. And as you pass through that ledge, you'll notice you're literally walking to the mouth of a monster. When you get in there, doors are locked behind you, the music is a bit more impactful, spikes on the ceiling and floors look like their teeth, there's a small mini-boss blocking a door that looks like it could be a bigger boss, and there's what looks to me like a decapitated Chozo statue. Either that or something was beheaded there. The door will have a freaking eyeball on it that shoots projectiles at you. And when you finally get through that door, oh wow, 16-bit Kraid is much more menacing. At first, he seems easy enough, and then he just pops up and turns his whole lair into a single giant room. This isn't a hard fight by any means, but it isn't easy, and your reward for defeating Kraid is the Varia suit. Now in the previous games, the Varia suit was strictly used to decrease your damage intake. In this game, it's there to help you traverse through the heated rooms which you otherwise couldn't walk through, which means now we're ready to go back to Meridia. The whole place just feels like a different experience. It's like getting to a new level in a game. New enemies, new puzzles, new ways to traverse. You'll start trying things in areas because the environment is basically asking you to try it. You'll enter corridors with rising lava that you have to carefully traverse. You'll face enemies that take way more shots to defeat. You'll face platforming challenges that would make an Italian plumber blush. But most importantly, you'll find a speed booster. And it's basically a super sprint that will generally mow down enemies in certain blockades along the way. It's automatically activated as you run, but you have to run long enough to get it going and it'll turn off if you stop. But now that you know you have the power up, you can head back and take down certain blocks that were blocking your path before. Or you can make it past gates that were quickly closing on you when you entered a room. The point is, you can continue on your journey, and just as you make it to a room that you can't advance in the room immediately below it you'll find the ice beam, and now you can definitely advance by applying it there. And then not long after that, you'll apply it again by freezing some enemies and climb up a long shaft. Eventually you'll walk through a door and the door will close behind you, but this time it will be yellow. So you're locked in and will have to find the next key, wherever that key may be. The important thing is that it's somewhere in this general vicinity, and even if you try to escape from a different area, you'll just run into another yellow door. The game will not let you go anywhere unless you find the key. It didn't take me too long to plant some bombs next to the floor in the entrance and fall down, and sure enough, after using the ice beam to help me with some platforming enemies, I got myself the key. And we now have the power bomb. And the square just gets a little bit bigger. It's kind of funny because outside of those first few areas where I genuinely got lost and wasted a good 3 hours or whatever, There were so many moments in this game where I think I was lost for 5, 10, or even 15 minutes, and I'd almost get frustrated, but then I'd find that moment, that hidden tunnel or destroyable block or random power-up that I was looking for. I just didn't know what I was looking for, but I knew I was looking for something. When I was playing, I remember being stressed about finding the power bomb, but as I'm making this video, I'm realizing that I was on the path all along, and I didn't get sidetracked at all. I was comfortably being guided by the game, along with utilizing my personal skill to make sure I'm following the guide and not veering off like some kind of amateur gamer. Well, not in this particular instance anyway. But now that I got my new key, my new toy, I wanted to play with it. I wanted to traverse the new areas I couldn't access before. Well, one area I was locked out of despite spending a bunch of time trying to freeze enemies and platforming on them. Like I said, I didn't know what a grapple beam was, so I thought the ice beam was the key to this room. But anyway, when I eventually gave up, I remembered that there were all those yellow doors that I hadn't moved onto. As I continued to traverse, I passed by this glass tube. I so wish I could tell you guys that I had a feeling that I could blow it up and that's why I used the power bomb. But this was actually one of those few things I remembered from my first playthrough. And I explicitly remembered it because I was lost like crazy and had to look up a guide, and that's how I learned that you could shatter the tube. I'm gonna have to dock some points from the game for this. It's not something you could obviously do. I don't even know how you would know to try it. I mean, the idea that you could break the glass could come to your mind, and you might shoot some missiles or explore, but when you shoot and nothing shows signs of cracking, you'll probably just move on. Because in every other moment that could destroy a part of the stage to access, when you shoot, you got feedback. I can only imagine how many kids in the 90s got stuck because of this, and spent days or weeks exploring the whole map because they didn't know this was feasible. But anyway, that's a 90s kid problem. For the rest of you, it should be fine. As soon as you destroy the tube and end up in the water, oh my god, I can't explain it to you, but you can feel how heavy Samus is. It's almost discomforting. Because in contrast, she's so much quicker and floatier outside of the water that this not only feels heavy, it feels unenjoyable. And the game wants you to feel that. It wants you to hate jumping through the water. It wants you to find out where the ability is that allows you to get through the water easier, or drain it altogether. You'll get to a room that will uncover more of Meridia to explore, and you'll just keep doing what you've been doing. You'll enter a sand room and explore a whole new type of dead end. By now, nothing made me want to figure out how to traverse the water more than this whole area. I kept going in circles and I was genuinely getting frustrated. The water was ruining my enjoyment of the game. I decided to leave. I went on a giant detour. I was backtracking areas I had been to and double checking to see if I forgot anything. Thankfully, I ran into the yellow door I had reached earlier, and I was no longer feeling the anxiety of being lost. I knew I wasn't ready for the water area, and I was right, because I needed to be better prepared. And then I walked through a door, and damn it, there was just more water. Okay, it's not that way. Somehow I ended up back outside by the ship. Interestingly, this is where I found out that the ship saves the game and restocks all of your energy and missiles, so that was nice. And my detour just continued from here. Grabbing missiles I didn't even know I wanted, returning to the golden statue room and seeing Craig dissolve because I beat him, re-entering Brinstar and getting a reserve tank, which is kinda like a health regenerator but only kicks in when you die, and more missiles, and more super missiles. I was able to use a power bomb to access a new area, however. When I dropped down to this location, I ran into these guys. I knew what to do. This is where you learn to wall jump. You can't leave unless you learn how to do it. And I thought it was a power-up before, but I guess it was just part of my moveset all along. I thought this was the end of my detour, that maybe I had to find somewhere to wall jump now, but instead of that I bumped into the ostrich that teaches you how to super jump. I remember that too from my last playthrough. It was easy. You just run and then press down and charge and then you can jump all the way to any ceiling. Was this the end of my detour now? The only thing I could think of was the area outside of the ship, so that's where I headed. And sure enough, the super jump did allow me to get much higher than I could earlier, but it still didn't really help get me anywhere. And I still couldn't get past the water no matter how hard I tried. I just kept searching. I found the spacer laser, but I'm not sure if that actually unlocked anything or if that was even needed. Still, it was a nice addition. I got to the room that had the entrance to Ridley, but I wasn't equipped to get through the lava on the floor, so I just kept looking. I must have gone through the whole map twice by now. I got to areas I had already been to, areas that I wasn't meant to go to, all of it. And then I finally figured it out. After what must have been an hour-and-a-half detour, and granted a very fruitful detour, because I was much stronger now, so maybe it was intended. But there was this spot right here, with the power bombs. This is what I was searching for all along. But my search square has gotten so large that a nudge in the right direction would have meant the world to me. Either way, I dropped down, the music was sinister, so I knew this had to lead to something of relevance. I looked around a bit and decided to go through the green door, and yes! Boss fight. God, I was so relieved to face this guy. And I noticed the tiles on the ceiling too. I was about to figure out what they were for. and I was so happy because I was locked behind advancing so much without them. Unfortunately, I was expecting an immediate Chozo statue, but it turns out it was just more searching, which is fine. The important thing is I knew where I was meant to be, and it made me feel secure. I got a little stuck here until I realized I was way overthinking it and just needed to do a running jump, and there I found myself with my newest toy, or key, or whatever I've been calling it, the grapple beam. And the square gets a little bigger. Samus gets a little stronger. Time to continue the hunt. The grapple beam, like the wall jump, isn't completely intuitive. It has the same fair bit of finicky old school control like many of the other movements in this game, but it's not so terrible that it'll ruin your time. I remember when I did finally grab the grapple beam though, that's when I was able to collect so many more missiles. There were tons of moments that I found in my hunt when I was lost that were hidden behind the grapple, so luckily as I traversed through the map and got back to those areas, I was rewarded for the time I lost. I even got myself a weapon upgrade in the wave beam, which was definitely appreciated. That being said, I did end up spinning my wheels yet again because I still wasn't ready to take on Meridia, even though I thought that's where I needed to be for sure. And to add somewhat of an insult to injury, I picked up the X-ray scope, which allows you to search areas without mindlessly bombing floors and shooting walls. Which all around is a good thing, but now when you're lost and the paranoia starts to kick in, you really start to use it. The issue is in future games, I remember it was just a quick click of a button and uncovered all the secrets in a room you're in. Whereas here, you have to cycle your weapons to get to it, which is 5 weapons total, and you have to hold the dash button. And all of this happens while you're completely halted. So it's a very useful item, but it's also very time consuming. Luckily, shortly after, I remember the entrance to this wrecked ship with the grapple overhead. So I ran outside and I continued towards the newest area to conquer. They do a very good job with the visuals here. You genuinely feel like you're in a ship that failed underwater. Nothing is working, not even most of the doors, until you're greeted by some kind of squid-like enemy named Phantoon. It's a spirit or a ghost of some sort. Now, I don't know if he's easy or if I was just over-prepared, but it felt like he was very easy. And he's actually one of the monsters from the Golden Statue. It's very underwhelming in that regard. Kraid was more of a spectacle, and even some of the other bosses I faced earlier felt like they were a larger imprint. But regardless, when you defeat Phantoon, the powerless and abandoned relic of a ship suddenly comes to life, and you get to continue on your journey. Not that it matters too much, but I think it would have been better if it was the opposite order. Like if you had entered the ship, conquered the rooms, faced all the challenges, get the power-ups and collectibles, and then the ability to exit getting the main power-up in your way would be to defeat Phantoon. I think that would have made his appearance a bit more interesting. But regardless, with the wrecked ship coming to life, you'll quickly get a map. It's a small map. To counter that, there are a lot of hidden areas here, and when I couldn't search anymore, I found a ceiling tile that I could get through in morph ball form, but not unless I could figure out the timing of how to bomb jump. I didn't know if it was the only way up there at this point of the game, but it was all I could think of. I thought doing so meant I'd be using the bomb jump more, but this was the only real moment that I actually had to do it. The reward for getting up there was entering a room that required you to defeat every enemy inside of it to unlock one of the 3 exits. On one hand, I find this somewhat of an annoying chore, but on the other hand, I think that was seen as a challenge to provide to the wrecked ship because there really isn't all that much to search and you're not going to spend too much time here. So you'll likely have to do this 3 or 4 times depending on how efficient you are in your exploration and never deal with it again. Plus, by now the game has clearly kicked up another level and is testing your resolve. There will be a handful of more somewhat difficult encounters like this Samus will have to face if she plans to accomplish her mission. And as she continues to look around the small area, knowing there must be a secret here, the eerie music plays, and every door leads to a dead end. So she has no choice but to leave the ship, prompting her to notice another exit beneath her that wasn't on the original map. She gets inside, uses her grapple beam, the tune in the background changes to one we've gotten used to whenever something important is nearby. She swings across over these spikes and simply discovers a standing Chozo with open hands. Well, since there's no power-up, she might as well roll up and take a rest and oh my god, Samus is the key! The Chozo statue activates and literally walks down a set of stairs. And finally, we found the gravity suit. All of those water sections made us feel heavy? Yeah, that's not an issue anymore. And the best part is, we got a new skin. Samus is purple now. I accidentally took the long way back to Meridia, but I was able to get a few weapon power-ups and stop by the Golden Statue room and verify that 2 of the main bosses were left, so it wasn't a total wasted trip. But exploring Meridia with the gravity suit was easy enough. I was able to see a ton of the map and find many secrets because of how equipped I was. My curiosity was rewarded with E-tanks and missile tanks and the like. I even discovered an elevator that travels between the upper and lower Meridia. And I thought it was crazy at first, but I definitely noticed a Metroid while swiftly moving through there. I bounced around between upper and lower Meridia quite a bit, discovered an elevator that took me back up to Criteria, and eventually back to the wrecked ship. And all that really did was open up a route for exploration between the areas, but my curiosity was rewarded with an E-tank, so it's not all bad. So I'm pretty sure this was actually the part where I got lost the longest. The last major full map hunt took me about an hour or so. This time, I think it was closer to 2 hours. There were puzzles that involved falling down quicksand, but you have to fall down the right pit to get past those. To be fair, most of the obscure stuff was rewarding, but it still just cost me so much time. And it doesn't help that so much of the exploration required perfect use of the wall jump or grapple beam. Every time I thought I figured out where to go, I ended up just finding more and more secrets. I was scanning everything, and just hoping to find some kind of guidance, but nothing was working. But finally, almost 2 hours after this whole detour began, I figured out there was an obscure door at the top left corner of this big room. And as soon as I went through it, I found some fake Metroids. By the way, only after I finished this game did I discover they were called Mocktroids. I knew they were bootleg as soon as I walked into that room. They looked like an old school Mad Catz N64 controller version of Metroid. And it was just made more obvious when I was able to kill them with a couple of regular ice shots. But these are a cause for concern though. Samus is here on a mission to ensure the space pirates don't use the baby Metroid to create more Metroids and weaponize them. If these were the best the space pirates could do, that's one thing, but the fact that they're able to create these abominations is a cause for concern. And as such, Samus swiftly destroys them and continues forward. I love that the room is clearly kept in a cold temperature, almost like they had to refrigerate these specimens to keep them alive. And the background music and atmosphere and ambiance, and oh my god, these Metroid games just have a way of sucking you into them, and it's so impressive. Somehow I keep finding myself not being mad that I was just lost for 2 hours to find these dumb things. And sure enough, you fall through some fake spikes that the game tries to guide you towards by placing them under brittle grapple beam catches, which collapse if you hang too long, in hopes that you'll fall through. And you'll find the door with the creepy eyeball. And you'll finally get to Dragoon. I think at this point for me, it was like 3 hours since I faced off against Phantoon. Probably 2 hours too much. But regardless, I wasn't even mad that I already knew how to cheese this fight. I learned by seeing a friend do it when I was a kid, and it's one of the only things I remembered about this entire Metroid series. Destroy all of these turrets on the wall, let Dragoon grab you, and grab your fork, and stick it in the electric socket, and voila. Easy peasy. I love that when you kill Dragoon, a bunch of its babies just come in and take it away. Are they eating it? Are they burying it? I don't know, and I love that I don't know it. It's just its own mystery. What I do know is I'm glad that the game rewarded me with the space jump, and that I hopefully never have to use the grapple or wall jump again. The space jump is also finicky, but it's significantly easier to manage than the grapple and wall jump. From this point onward, I wasn't really lost anymore. The game gets much more straightforward, and with the power of the space jump traversal becomes a lot easier. I made my way back up to a previously locked door that was literally locked so that you have to beat Dragoon to pass it. And I ended up in a room full of space pirates and collected the plasma beam, which made killing them an easy task. I think I had conquered all of Meridia. There was like one missile tank I saw earlier that I wasn't sure how to grab, but I didn't care too much. And now that I had the space jump, I was able to try funky stuff like jumping through this tiny hole in the ceiling that I previously thought only a morph ball could fit through. I got to a room with a ton of sand blocking my way that an enemy kindly cleared for me, and the reward for my patience was a spring jump. So I guess you don't need to learn how to bomb jump to get to the secret I found earlier. I think this is another one of those luxury power-ups that if you don't experiment, you could easily miss, but it won't affect the game at all. Still, I was happy I found it. And likewise, I was happy to leave Meridia, since I found all these fun little trinkets like a reserve, an E-tank, and missiles and the like. Thankfully, I remembered where Ridley was, so my journey there wasn't really all that long or annoying. I even managed to uncover some secrets as I headed towards him. Also, I didn't realize having the gravity suit made Samus invulnerable to the acid or lava or whatever, so that was super convenient. At least I'm pretty sure it's because of the gravity suit, but I could be wrong. Either way, I love the tune as you make your way to fight Ridley. This really highlights how much more significant he is to the series than the other enemies. Like, this feels like I'm going to the end of the game. And I realize there's more after him, but heading towards him is so impactful, especially when you consider the lore we learn about him in future titles that I won't really go into too much detail about yet. He's an absolute menace, he's intimidating, and he really makes you work to confront him, unlike the other bosses we faced. There's another one of those secret Chozo statue morph ball gimmicks to flush out the acid in the room so Samus can drop down and make her way through more obstacles, including yet another fight against the Chozo statue. But unlike the one from earlier in the game, this one is here to do damage. It will literally sidestep if you shoot a regular missile at it, and if you shoot a super missile at it, the thing will straight up catch it and launch it back at you like you're its nephew and it's playing catch. Honestly, it's one of the coolest moments in the game. When I noticed the missile in his hand, I audibly said, "Oh come on, what the hell?" Anyway, before moving on to Ridley, I looked around the room in hopes of finding anything that could make me a bit stronger, just in case he would be as menacing as I feared. And when I finally moved on, I was gifted with the screw attack. Granted, I don't think that's very useful to take Ridley on, but it will make the rest of the game a lot easier to get through, so I'm not complaining. Plus, immediately after that, the game let me recharge my health, which, quite frankly, worried me more than comforted me. And I was right to be worried. From the second you enter the next room, and the music picks up, you just get a wave of enemies to get through. And I hope you know how to use a screw attack, because the whole next segment would make Flappy Bird shudder. Not to mention space pirates, and those weird heads on the wall enemies. All of this can easily be accomplished with a screw attack. Like, this all just feels like an epic challenge. It's like if Ridley Scott designed the World 8 of Bowser Castle. You get the worst of the worst thrown at you. My health was so low too, and I genuinely started to worry because there were these two space pirates that locked me out of advancing that I couldn't even damage unless I stood on tiles next to them. They literally couldn't be harmed unless they were gold, and they took away a good 80% of my health, before I started to figure out their patterns and dodging appropriately. I think if I didn't have reserve tanks, I would have never made it past this point. These things were harder than some of the boss fights. They were quite frankly the best of the space pirates, and quite frankly, some of the most fun I was having from an action platforming perspective in hours. Like, yeah, I was enjoying all the Metroiding I was doing earlier, with the hunting and square expanding and power-ups and whatever, but this is different. This was an actual tactical fight. I hadn't experienced this all game. And I was having so much fun against these guys, and as soon as I got past them, I ended up near a farming pipe. And of course I did. I was about to face Ridley himself. If those were his guards, I couldn't imagine what he was about to do to me. I was literally building up the hype for this fight in my own head. Despite the fact that every other fight was a piece of cake, I knew the fight against Ridley would be the big payoff I was waiting for. Samus enters the lair, face to face with the menace. And oh my god, they put him in basically the same room he was in during the original fight in Metroid NES. That's so cool. They knew they didn't need to go all out. This was enough. A cage match. I immediately noticed the room was huge and Ridley would fly away during most of my attacks, so I jumped up and dropped every single one of my power bombs in the middle of the room. I don't know how much damage these things did, but I know that he was barely able to attack me during all of this. And then I switched to my 35 super missiles. I missed a few of them because I was trying to be evasive, but then I realized I had to land those hits. I didn't know how much more he would take, but I also noticed how much less Samus could take. 30 power bombs, 35 super missiles, and a couple of regular missiles later, and the giant beast went down. And the terrifying thing is how little health Samus had remaining. If I didn't have a reserve tank, I never would have beaten him. And I'm not sure if every super missile is 3 or 4 times as strong as the regular missiles, but I don't know that I'd have been able to land 100 shots on the regular missiles on Ridley. And with all of the power bombs I used, I can't imagine how many more missiles I'd have needed if I didn't have those to spam at the start of the fight to weaken him, before the fight effectively began. It was at this moment, this very moment specifically, this fight against Ridley, that I understood the value of this game. I wasn't lost during those 3 hours. I was preparing myself, specifically for this fight. If I hadn't gotten lost, I'd have came here, easily been wiped away by Ridley, and begrudgingly would have had to go and rescale the entire map over and over again to better prepare myself for this encounter. I spent a lot of time being curious, a lot of time looking in places I had no business looking, a lot of time being frustrated that I couldn't just find the next power-up, the next key, the next checkpoint, the next significantly hidden aha moment that would allow me to pass. And while I spent all game just thinking these powers are well and good, but I just really want to get on with it, when I defeated Ridley and glanced over at my ammo and health, I realized that none of it was a waste of time. It was all a means to an end. And that gave me so much joy that I struggled to even put it into words. And now, as I reflect on it, I understand why everything was so easy before this. Why all of the other enemies weren't anything spectacular. Why the challenge of this game was the puzzle solving and exploration. Because everything prior to heading towards Ridley is all simply meant to train you to be able to enter his lair. Everything prior to Ridley is just a filter. The 3 bosses can be defeated without a thought, and I could probably do it so much quicker on a second playthrough, but after I beat those 3 bosses, I'm going to spend a whole lot of time scaling the entire map to prepare myself for the fight against Ridley. And gosh, it goes a step further. Without the excessive searching, at best you will make it to the lair, but you won't get past all of the challenges to even make it to Ridley. By the time I got through the 2 space pirates, I had like 20% of my health left. I don't know that I'd have been able to make it to them, let alone even be able to defeat them, or that Chozo statue for that matter. I can't even imagine how many times I'd have tried to get through this lair if it wasn't for getting lost. Now granted, I still think the game should have guided me slightly better. Instead of being lost for 3 hours, I probably only needed a third of that at most for a first time playthrough, but still. With the defeat of Ridley, you quickly get another E-Tank. You're also given more of a chance to search one last time as you make your way back to the beginning of the game, to get to that golden statue room. And you bet your butt, after what I just endured, I spent even more time searching. I know I didn't 100% this game, but by the time I finished it, I felt like I had done way more than I needed. And at that point, it was straight up intentional. I finally went back to the early sections of the map, and naturally looked around some more and just kept finding stuff. I can't believe how many things were hidden right under my nose that I didn't realize was there in the beginning of the game. Even in the room that originally held the mother brain, right where she sat, I found yet more missiles, and I loved that. I jumped back up the long shaft. I even found this door here. It's still locked, come to think of it. I never did make it past here, and I have no idea what's behind it. I kept going back to the beginning area of the game, much more powerful than I was earlier. Stopped at my ship to recharge everything. I didn't leave a single stone unturned. I was adamant I had to be prepared. And when I finally felt like I had all of my health and weapons that I needed, I entered the mysterious hallway, walked into the golden statue room, and saw the remaining statues dissolve and create a passageway below me. And I took the elevator back down to Turion, like I did in Metroid on the NES. I saved the game, ran through the door, and I was immediately greeted by Metroids. Oh no, they figured out the formula. This one is definitely real. Ice beam and 5 missiles. I kept going, more Metroids, more ice beams, more missiles. There's like virtually no music at this point. It's such a bizarre feeling. By now, I was even starting to worry that I'd have to face the evolved forms of these things, but fortunately, that didn't happen. Remember, back in 1994, this was the introduction of many kids to the series, and these things just looked so much more menacing in 16-bit than they did in previous games. These are what all of the commotion is about, and it's such a terrible thought that Samus might be too late, and the experiment was completed. Every room requires you to defeat all of the Metroids to move forward, and every room has more challenges and obstacles in your way as you take on those Metroids. It's not difficult per se, but it's disconcerting. And then you make it into a room with frantic side hoppers, and a whole load of sand, and the music is back on again, which immediately feels odd. And you enter the next room, and it's literally a Chozo statue that dissolves right in front of your face, when you barely touch it. And there's just more and more of these ashed up enemies dissolving, until you get to the side hopper that slowly approaches you. This thing definitely didn't cause all of this mess, and I think all of the frantic ones in the previous rooms were running away from whatever is in here. Now look, I'd like to reiterate that this is all very new to me. So while it might not seem that immaculate since we're effectively 30 years from the release of this game, understand that everything from here forward was new for me. So when I shot at the side hopper, thinking I'd just keep moving forward to find the true boss of this game, and then was interrupted with what I can only describe as a super freaking pumped up Metroid, I literally jumped. Look at this thing. What in the actual hell were the space pirates able to do to it? Is this what they're trying to weaponize? How much crap did they pump into it? Why hasn't it evolved into its next form? Of course, I ask that now. At the time, I just frantically started unloading everything onto it. I started mashing all my buttons and almost exited out of the game as a result. And just as I thought I was about to restart my life and have to Google the tactic to kill this thing, at 1 health point, the Metroid let go of Samus. Why? Was it trying to weaken her and guide her? Maybe when it attached to Samus, it was able to connect with the baby Metroid that guided Samus at the end of the last game? Oh, hell no. This is that baby Metroid. My mind was freaking blown. This was legitimately my train of thought. What on earth did the space pirates do to it? That's why it let go of Samus, because it immediately felt remorse and regretted its decision. It just realized it almost killed its own mother. And there's something so sad about that whole encounter. At the end of the last game, it was almost like a cute little pet. And look what they've done to it now. They turned it into a freak, into a monster. And as such, they deserved all of the damage it caused. Everything beyond this point is all just quiet. There's nothing alive, no music. I got to recharge my health and my ammo, so something clearly was about to happen. I entered the newest mother brain lair and realized she was still alive. But this all felt so off. On the NES game, defeating her was an absolute nightmare. This is quite frankly a joke. And of course it is, because she popped up and it was an actual behemoth. I unleashed everything onto her. Power bombs, super missiles, regular missiles, charge shots. I thought I was doing well, but I was taking a lot of damage. And just as I started to understand why they gave me a save point before this fight, the monster unleashed its absolute wrath onto Samus. But I guess that was the whole fight, because Samus couldn't move. Mother Brain was just about to finish her off. But what she forgot to account for was the giant monster they created that loved its mother. And with the very path to this room that Samus created after her encounter with the Super Metroid, it managed to enter this lair and latch onto Mother Brain. And it sucked so much life out of her that she turned purple, and then she turned green. And if that's not enough, it then immediately attached to Samus, and it gave her all of the energy, quickly healing her back to full health. But then, all of a sudden, Mother Brain jumps back and just unloads on the Super Metroid. But the Metroid won't relent. It got Samus to full health, and with cracks in its body and discoloration, it charges towards Mother Brain before all of a sudden, Mother Brain killed the Metroid. And in its final act of heroism and defiance against the space pirates that treated it as nothing more than a specimen, it dissolves and gives all of its energy and powers to Samus. And for the second game in a row, the baby Metroid has given its mother a clear path to victory. Guys, this is a spectacle.